Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host Aarushi, Kataria, and today with me I have Sudisha Mishra. We're both junior research scholars at the Takshashila Institution, and we work on the 20 Million Jobs Project. Today, we're here to talk about migrants and what role they play in the Indian economy. We'll specifically be discussing the case of Bangladeshi immigrants. When Bangladesh became independent in 1971, immigration from the country to Assam and West Bengal became a regular affair. According to 2011 data, India is home to 5 million immigrants and is considered the 14th most desirable country in the world for immigrations. However, there is growing nationalism ideology which revolts against the migrant influx in India. In this podcast, we'll trace the history of Bangladeshi immigrants, address some pertinent questions on immigration, and then discuss the role that these immigrants play in the Indian economy. So, Sudisha, could you maybe tell me a little bit about the benefits and, the downsides of immigration a little, because we have discussed this idea of getting people from India to immigrate where there are jobs, but we're not talking about people immigrating into India. So what, according to you, are some of the biggest benefits of this process and maybe some unintended consequences or downsides that we should keep in mind?
Right, thanks for having me, Aarushi. So I think that before answering the question, you mentioned that we talk about Indians emigrating to other countries, but we never talk about people coming to India for jobs. So I think that all the data and research that is there on immigration being a positive thing and what are the downsides of immigration, all that data and research is based on developed countries. So when you look at countries like Japan, for example, which is being cited as a desirable country for people to immigrate to in the future, because Japan does not have a young population which can handle its economy in the future. So on that note, yes, it's a good idea. And even for maybe the US or maybe Europe, a young population is desired and people should definitely immigrate there for their economy. But a country like India, which is, labor surplus and which has a huge unemployment problem, there's just not enough data and research. So when you look at when anybody sits down to do research on or just read about what are the benefits of immigration, there are many. So one of them would be that it just works like a company, right? For example, we talk about getting more women in the talent pool because that's just going to increase competition for any company. Similarly, when you bring more immigrants or more migrants into the mix of the people who are looking for jobs, basically the labor force, there's going to be competing salaries and it's just going to make the workforce more productive. And in technical terms, actually, this is called the immigration surplus, which means that when immigrants come into the mix of the labor force, the GDP increases. Now, the increase is very minute. It's just like maybe the impact on native salaries is just maybe like 0.4% or so. But when that might be a very small percentage, but when you think of it in absolute numbers, it's in millions and sometimes even in billions. So that's quite important, right? That's why immigration is actually successful in that way. I think in countries like the US, for example, immigration is quite beneficial because immigrants are looking for any jobs to survive. They do not have specific criteria of the kind of job that they're looking for, right? A lot of them don't even have any formal skills on any formal education. So they're looking for anything that can help them survive, which means that they are ready to do menial jobs like maybe rat picking or perhaps even being a janitor, which someone who gets an education might not be ready for. And whether it's the US or it's India, in some ways it is a status symbol, right? But that's not really an option for immigrants, right? They don't go to a country and just think that, okay, now I'm going to be a software engineer here. I think the whole reason why they are immigrating to another country is to improve their economic standard or run away from religious persecution for that matter. So I think anything that they can get their hands on, they just try to do, which means that they increase the overall economic output, and they are there are better jobs for native people because immigrants are able to do menial jobs and native people might not be willing to do. So let's say there is a factory or something which is not able to witness any growth because they're facing a labor shortage. If you're able to bring immigrants to that particular country so that they can do those labor shortages, obviously there's going to be economic growth of that company, and they are going to be able to explore opening more white collar roles which natives can definitely take, right? So in that way, immigration works well for most countries. But at the same time, I think immigration can also be bad because it actually lowers the wages of competing workers. And but at the same time, it increases the wages of complementary workers. But by that, what I mean is that suppose there's an office and there's a janitor who's already working there and they are the native of that country. Now let's say an immigrant comes. So for that janitor, in a way, their job is basically there's a threat to their job, right? But because the immigrant is able to perform the same job of janitor does not require any technical skills per se. But the same immigrant will not pose a threat to, let's say, a marketing specialist at the same company. So so when immigrants come, that's probably the only disadvantage of immigrants, that they kind of maybe reduce the wages of people who are not earning too well. So basically, any negative wage effects are concentrated among low skill but not high skilled workers. So that's probably the only con of immigration. Now, it's important to note that all this research which exists on the benefits and cons of immigration are for developed countries. It's a point that I've made before. That all of these points that I've just stated might not apply to India because it's a developing country. And the truth is that there is no proper research which has been conducted in on developing economies. So so that's how I think I want to end this answer, that even though there are benefits and cons to immigration, we don't know whether those benefits and cons apply to developing economies.
Right. Now, however, something that we've been talking about in our podcast and, the project that we're working on is the fact that India doesn't have jobs, that the people who are looking for these jobs aren't able to find them. So, do you really think that at this point in time, India needs immigration? And if so, why?
So I think that, first of all, like I said, there just isn't enough research to say whether or not India needs immigration, because you know we haven't really performed any data science that can prove that India needs immigration in the first place. We just don't have that data. So I don't think anyone can answer this question correctly at this point. But one can't change the fact that immigrants are looking for any kind of adaptability, which means that they're ready to do the most menial jobs ever. So I mean, if you look at in North India, when you go to Delhi, for example, and you visit the slums, you will see that a lot of these slums are refugee hubs, right? These are refugees who have come from West Bengal, Assam, and most likely they've come from Bangladesh. And there's a good chance that they are doing jobs like rickshaw pulling in the city, or they are yak pickers. They sometimes even migrate to nearby cities like Lucknow, for example, or Gurgaon, for example, where they perform the same roles. So, by this point, I think I want to stress on the fact that we often talk about underemployment in our project. So these migrants don't really care whether they're underemployed or not, right? They don't leave the labor force, which is another topic that we've discussed in the podcast before. They stay in the labor force and they try to get even the most menial job possible because they have to earn money to survive. So one can argue that perhaps India needs immigration that way, right? Then the third would be that India is a labor surplus country with an unemployment problem, which again is quite confusing because we can't answer whether India needs immigration or not. So, these are conflicting points. On one hand, we don't have data, but we know that India is a labor surplus country. But on the other hand, we also know that many people, many natives in India are leaving the workforce because they're underemployed or they're unemployed and they've lost the motivation to do jobs, right? So who are doing these menial, low wage jobs that do not require a lot of skills, right? These jobs are vacant and they require workforce. So I think that would be my answer to this question, that we don't know whether India needs immigration or not because there isn't enough research. But at the same time, I think that one can argue that Bangladesh's economic situation is improving day by day, which we've also covered before in a project that Bangladesh has made some strides in the way, and in the schemes that they are rolling out, and the fact that they are getting their women labor force to work and participate in jobs. So perhaps immigration might not be even an important problem in the future, because why would anybody immigrate to another country if their own country is able to offer them a respectable job in the first place? I think the only grounds would be religious persecution. And we can imagine a scenario where Bangladesh neither has religious persecution nor a bad economic situation. So then in that case, there will be no illegal immigration, or, I mean, to put it simply, India won't have an immigration problem. So I think there's no right answer to the question whether India needs immigration or not. We have conflicting points that I've already brought forward, but yeah, that's the right answer.
Right, that was a very good answer. So I think now to get into the specific case study we want to analyze, for the benefit of our listeners, could you help us trace the history of Bangladesh a little and put it in context of the topic we're talking about?
Sure. So first of all, the interesting bit is that historically people from Bangladesh have been migrating to other states in India, which means that even before partition occurred, there is a history of people who live in the Bangladesh region migrating to Assam and West Bengal for looking for better economic opportunities. So just imagine a scenario, right, where we know that people from Bihar, and we covered this in the last podcast, and Bihar is a state which really needs an employment boost. Just imagine a scenario where people from Bihar are migrating to, let's say, Delhi or Haryana, right, for jobs. And now suddenly we draw an international border between Bihar and Delhi and Haryana, and we start saying that the people from this country are now immigrating to Delhi and Haryana country, and now the latter has an immigration problem. Right, that's what happened in this scenario. That people from the Bangladesh region have been historically migrating towards Assam and West Bengal, perhaps even other states later, in terms of for better employment opportunities. But now there's just exists an international border, so we have given some technical names to it, which is illegal immigration and all that. So if someone says that illegal immigration is a problem in India right now, with respect to Bangladeshis, I would say that if you want to call it a problem, then I'd say that it's existed since forever, right? It's a problem that can be historically traced to perhaps even before the colonial past. Now, this problem got a boost under colonial rule because when you look at Assam's geography, it's very rich in minerals and it's a very fertile place. It has natural irrigation facilities. Of course, it gets flooded now every year, but come to think of it, it's a very fertile region, and that's what the our colonizers recognized, right? They recognized that this is a place that can be exploited and capitalized for economic growth. So then there were plans to settle Assam, and for that reason, under colonial rule, many people from states like Uttar Pradesh, perhaps even Delhi, from West Bengal, and perhaps even Bangladesh, they were all intentionally made to migrate to Assam. And that's how Assam, which was sparsely populated, it kind of the population in that area increased, right? So those are some colonial roots for this entire immigration that takes place. Then after that, post 1971, when Bangladesh was sapped of its entire, it became really poor because of the war, and it was probably destructed beyond repair. But we know now that that wasn't the case. But there was mass migration from Bangladesh to India, in terms of better economic opportunities, right? Since then, I think there is a huge influx, which also might be conjecture because we don't have any official data on how many immigrants have come since the war ended to India. Now, when the Bangladeshi immigrants come to India, they settle in three places, right? Most of them settle in Muslim majority districts, which are near the India Bangladesh border. Obviously, because Bangladesh is a Muslim majority country and they're coming to India, which is a Hindu majority country. So they would rather settle in the communities which are likely to absorb them and which are likely to make them feel more welcomed. The second would be that they come to the northern states and they do menial jobs like rack picking, rickshaw pulling, among others. And the third would be that they go off to the southern states or even the Deccan states and they try to make a living there. So, you know, South India is one example. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, there are some states where in the past 5 years, Bangladeshi immigrants are, they are inclined towards settling. So these are three areas and three possible migration patterns when you look at how Bangladeshis navigate when they enter India. Now, since we know that we have a right wing party who's ruling, I mean, who was ruling the country, we know that since they've come to power, they've discussed the problem of illegal immigration and all this fiasco around NRC and counting illegal immigrants and how there's a security problem and that they're not immigrants, they're infiltrators and all that. Again, these are all conjectures, right? I think the major worry that the party has is that these migrants are used by other political parties as vote banks. And perhaps they're even there to exhaust India's resources, which are already scarce, right? We don't have enough resources for the population that we have. Perhaps even that they want to start maybe like a Muslim majority state of their own. And I think the last would be that there's a huge security issue that they might be terrorists in disguise. Again, all of these are conjectures. They are all based on incomplete information. People who make these claims, whether they're officials or whether they are people, just random people, right? They don't have data to back this up. So again, while we know that India has historically had a pattern and, like historically has immigrants coming from Bangladesh region to other states, we don't know whether it's a problem or not. So all these arguments that you hear against them, or anyone hears against them, may or may not be true. We don't know that. And I think my last point would be that looking at them from a humanity perspective, a more humanitarian lens, there's a desperation for hunger and there's a compulsion of improving their economic situation that most of these immigrants are looking for. It's something I said at the start of the podcast also that if your country is able to offer you a respectable life where you're not discriminated against based on your religion or your economic situation, there is no need for you to immigrate unless you absolutely want to because of personal interests, right? Most of these immigrants are really poor, whether they are Hindu immigrants or they are Muslim immigrants. They are looking for a better economic situation. Most of these are poor. Most of these are ready to do menial jobs. So before making any conjectures, I think it's very important for any person who is claiming that we have an immigration, a Bangladeshi immigration problem to come up with data. And that's going to be difficult for sure, which I think I can talk about later in the podcast. But but we know that there is a, I wouldn't call it a problem, but I think there is a pattern of immigration from Bangladesh. And we don't know whether or not it's a problem anymore.
Right. And, during COVID, while the most famous image that we have of immigrants is them walking back from Delhi towards Uttar Pradesh, there's also this idea that, Bangladeshis were migrating, to South India and gaining jobs illegally. So could you tell me a little bit more about the job seeking patterns that, Bangladeshi immigrants are having, especially in the wake of the pandemics?
Yeah. So in the past 5 years, like I said, that Bangladeshi immigrants are preferring to migrate to southern states and do jobs there in order to survive. And there have been many news reports, especially during the 2 years when the pandemic was at its full potential, that there were lots of crackdowns by the Tamil Nadu police or maybe the Kerala police on it. So they would stop like random people on the road and try to see their ID proofs and all right. This is information that I've mostly found on right-leaning publication who, released or published these news reports. And when you read those news reports, you see that the police is saying constantly that most of these people are able to produce a legal document. So most of the illegal immigrants apparently are also said to have an Aadhaar, which makes it very difficult for anyone to legally prove that these people are not citizens of India, right? So I think the point that I have to make here is that perhaps this is just your bias, right? Perhaps they're not immigrants in the first place. Maybe they're just Indians and we don't know that. And it's not easy for them to also prove, right? So once you have an Aadhaar, it's very easy for you to navigate from one state to another. So let's say if someone is staying in Tamil Nadu, right? If an immigrant is staying in Tamil Nadu, and they hear that there is a crackdown happening, they can easily navigate to Karnataka or Kerala for that matter, the states as close to them. So this is what you can see news reports, news organizations reporting that these Bangladeshi immigrants are making their way to southern India and they are navigating from one state to another, which is why it's very difficult to catch hold of them in order to prove that the southern states have an immigrant problem. And then the third would be that even if they are able to catch these people are producing legal documents. So all in all, it's impossible for them to prove that there is an immigration problem. But they know that there is an immigration problem because apparently it's the Bangladeshis who are coming to South India. So again, all these are based on incomplete information that they do not have. So during the COVID-19, it was again and again reported that because the native migrants had to go back to their original states where they belong to. So many people from Bihar, for example, are working in South India. These Bangladeshis migrated at the same time to these states and they started doing the jobs and these migrants left behind. So I think an example would be that in Tamil Nadu, there's a knitwear industry and there are many places where migrants go to work. These illegal, not illegal, I would say Bangladeshi immigrants were reported to come there and start doing those jobs. So this was a lot of news reports. Now we don't know whether this is true or not, right? This is what has been kind of implied. There is no data or proper research to prove that this is actually happening. But I did find a paper which talked about Bengali immigrants who are settling in South India and how COVID-19 impacted their earnings. So I think a primary thing would be that most of those are earning there because West Bengal does not have a good enough wage rate. So most of them are going to Kerala, which has the highest wage rate in the country because of the labor laws that they've implemented there. And then in general, I think Kerala has a really good labor law system for migrants to survive. There's a high quality of living there also, which is something that these people are looking for. So now on one hand, it's being implied that there are illegal migrants coming from Bangladesh who are going to South India who are taking the jobs. But on the other hand, this research paper is proving that these people are actually from Assam and West Bengal who do not have economic opportunities there to survive. So they are going to better states in order to do the jobs. So again, I keep coming to this point that there is not enough data to prove that we really have an immigration problem or not. It's hard to say whether these Bangladeshi immigrants are actually going to southern states or not, because maybe it's a stereotype, but it's hard to kind of distinguish whether these people belong to Assam and West Bengal or they're Bangladeshi immigrants because of the historical fact that so many Bangladeshis have historically settled in West Bengal and Assam, and they form like a major part of the population that lives there. So maybe it's just a stereotype, right? Maybe that's not the case, but we don't have data to prove it. So all in all, I'll say that Bangladeshi is settling in southern states during COVID-19 may as well be a stereotype and maybe just conjecture. Again, we don't know that because we don't have enough investigation into that matter. And I don't think people should just read like random stuff and base their opinions on that. I think it's important for them to demand the government or the administration to conduct data drives in order to prove that even if they have a bias, whether it can be substantiated or not.
Right. And I think my last question on this discussion is what are some immediate steps that, should be taken, whether by India or Bangladesh, specifically on this issue of Bangladeshi immigration in India? Do you think, our immigration laws need to be tightened? Do you think our job geography needs to change? What, according to you, are some extremely immediate steps that could be taken to control this problem, so to speak?
Right. So I think the first step should be to ascertain whether we even have an immigration problem or not. So when you look at the manifestos of political parties, they talk about saving the Indian populace from an immigration problem. They need to back this with data, right? Conduct data drives and do not hide under the garb of immigrants migrating from one state to another. So it's hard to catch hold of them. I'm sure if you can pour resources into NRC, for example, if you think that you have enough resources to do that, I think you can conduct a census also, which has already been delayed, right? The last census was done in 2011. So I think the first step that the government should take, and it's something that the common populace should also demand, right? That, okay, you are saying that there's an immigration problem. Do you have data to substantiate that or not? How can we believe you? If one day you're saying that there are 15 million Bangladeshi units living in India, and then there's another research which random research which says that there are 2 million Bangladeshi immigrants living in India, right? So there's so much discrepancy when it comes to numbers of the immigrants living in India. I think the first thing that the government should do and that the people should demand is data. We need data to prove that we actually have an immigration problem or not. And it's so important right now because we know that this was one of the things in the ruling party's manifesto when they were winning the elections, and NRC will be implemented. And we know that the amount of resources that would be poured into NRC can be done for something else, right? We don't know whether we need NRC or not because, again, we don't have data to back that up. So I think it's important for the population to also demand that if the tax that they're paying, if that goes into NRC, is that even needed in the first place? Would they not have better infrastructure, or would they not have a cleaner air or anything that the government has the capability to do, but they're not doing because their interests are diverted? So I think it's very important for data to be collected. And I think that another thing that the government should do, whether it's our immigration problem or whether it's a 20 million jobs project, that they should solve the unemployment problem. I think the major discourse of people saying that immigrants should not come to India is that they're stealing our jobs, which is a common opinion in many other countries as well, especially the US. If the government solves, and it's going to take years and years, right? If the government does something about the unemployment problem, I think a big challenge will just eradicate, because as long as we don't have an employment problem, immigrants coming or not coming, uh, I mean, if we have an unemployment problem, we can't really concentrate on immigrants coming or not coming, because we have a major challenge to deal with, right? So if the government solves the unemployment problem, or at least tries to solve the unemployment problem for the natives in the first place, I think then we can discuss whether immigrants coming to India or not is a topic worth discussing or not, right? Right to, from what I can see, illegal immigration is a topic of priority as opposed to unemployment. And that's just going to fuel unemployment further, right? When your interests are not concentrated on something important. I think these are some immediate steps that the government and maybe the people can take.
Thank you so much. That was a very, very comprehensive answer. And I think that gives us a lot to think about, especially in the context of our project, in the context of larger conversations happening in India. So thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It was great having you. Thank you, dear listener, for listening to us.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.